All right, now I'd like to welcome to the show Patrick Carroll, managing editor of the Foundation for Economic Education, also known as FEE to friends. Welcome to Free the Economy, Patrick.
Thanks for having me on.
So, to begin with, can you just give our listeners a really quick description of what FEE is and what your role there is?
Absolutely. So, the Foundation for Economic Education was founded in 1946 by Leonard Read. Many libertarians will know him as the guy who wrote I, Pencil. And so, since then, for 78 years, FEE has been championing what we like to call the freedom philosophy. So, economic freedom, free markets, but also personal freedom, individual rights, private property, civil liberties, stuff like that. Obviously, with such a long history, our organization has gone through many different eras, but we've always had a commitment to rigorous free market scholarship and to spreading these ideas and really reaching out to a lay audience, to maybe newcomers to these ideas who perhaps aren't so familiar with them, and really introducing them for the first time and trying to make a compelling case for the freedom philosophy and for embracing this. So I've been with FEE for about 3.5 years now. As you said, I'm the managing editor, so I have a regular column there, and I also help with the rest of our publications as well, and write a daily email newsletter, stuff like that.
All right, that's great. And I know especially with so much history that FEE and a lot of their outside contributors, I think do a really good job of taking first principles, basic principles, uh, and applying them to whatever the sort of hot issues of the day are. And I think in sort of any philosophical or ideological viewpoint, right? Uh, whether it's the freedom philosophy or whether it's our socialist cousins, there's some basic understandings about how we think society should function, what's moral, what's not, and the task it seems of each generation is just sort of applying those basic ideas to every new thing that comes along, because in a way there's not that much new under the sun, right there.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
we like to describe our editorial kind of approach as timely stories, timeless principles, right? So weighing in on current events, but using them as teachable moments to educate people about this philosophy and specifically how this philosophy applies to that particular event, drawing on Mises, Hayek, right? All of the many great scholars in our tradition.
right, so one good example of that, I think, is all of the hubbub today over advanced supercomputing technologies known as artificial intelligence. So
Mhm.
we've had we've had some people here on our show here at Free the Economy before, that have sort of dove into AI issues, like Matt Middlestad, for example, and uh, there are there's two sort of aspects to it. There's the sort of like technological stuff that only someone who is like a real technologist can answer, but then there's all sorts of practical, social, and political applications and impacts that I think all of us who are interested in these ideas can dive into. So you recently wrote an article for Fee on AI and then the possible threat of future job losses, something that's come up a lot the past few years. So, some pundits have even said that they're so worried about future job losses from AI fueled automation that a lot of those applications should be made illegal so that certain workers won't lose their jobs. But, you know, I really wonder, again, speaking of, timeless versus timely issues, is this really a new worry when it comes to AI technology, or could we not have made the same argument about the very earliest factories during the Industrial Revolution?
Exactly. The Luddites, of course, famously were one of the first to make this argument that it's a bad thing that technology is taking away our jobs, right? And that we need to have the government come in and place restrictions on this technology to protect these jobs and these workers. And that argument has been brought up repeatedly in the centuries and decades since the Luddites. And especially, of course, whenever there's a new wave of technological innovation, you think about the rise of the car or the computer, any of these big waves there seems to be an accompanying pushback and a resistance, especially from the people who stand to lose a lot. But I think it's important that we push back against this idea that it's a problem that technology takes jobs. The reality is that technology is a tremendous force for human progress, right? We think about all of the economic gains that we've made over the past century. Yes, things aren't perfect. Yes, there's absolutely still problems, but we have come a long way. And a lot of that has been thanks to the technological growth that has been allowed to happen, right? And so when we think about placing limits on technology replacing jobs, what we're really doing is we're putting a check on economic growth. We're putting a check on prosperity, and that's going to end up harming all of us. And so, yes, change is difficult, and adapting to a new market and a new environment is definitely going to be challenging. And I don't relish the fact that people are going to lose their jobs and are going to have to find new lines of work. But I think it would be a mistake to say, well, because there might be some people who lose their jobs, therefore we shouldn't embrace progress. We shouldn't have, all of these great benefits from technological advancement. I think we need to say, no, this is the way the market works. And if we trust the market process, that is going to end up being a much better result for everyone, as opposed to if we listen to these Luddite claims about why we should save these jobs.
Yeah, and I was thinking about a an interview with Tucker Carlson was about probably now a year or two ago, where someone was asking him, what if we have uh, a future of driverless cars and driverless trucks, right? So there's
Mm.
no more long haul trucker jobs, and Tucker immediately said, "Oh no, if I was president, I'd make that illegal immediately, no question whatsoever." 'Cause he made a point, especially in about men without college degrees. A lot of them are truckers, and a lot of them have that as a stable long-term job. And and I was thinking about what if, Tucker's great grandfather was being interviewed in 1895, would he have said, I'm gonna outlaw all these horseless carriages, gonna outlaw these cars and trucks, motorized, because what about the Teamsters, right? What about the people who drive teams of horses, right? Because those would have been the truckers of their day. Um, and I wasn't in the studio with Tucker when he was answering, so I didn't have the chance to jump in and ask him this question. But I kind of wonder what he and plenty of other people who would probably say the similar thing. What would their be response to that? And how long, assuming, say you did do that in 1900 or whatever, no motorized vehicles, only only horses and people that work with horses. How long could you have kept that going, right? Because say Britain wouldn't have done that, Germany wouldn't have done it. Um, what's the long-term strategy there? The short-term strategy is people don't lose their jobs, which sounds nice, but you can't just stop the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard that clip too, and it was frustrating to listen. I think part of it is there's an underappreciation for just how massive the economic benefit would be. You think about something like the trucking industry, right? That's a significant expense. That's a significant amount of resources, right? Labor time that's going into transporting stuff from A to B. I think we would see costs come down significantly, right? There would be tremendous benefits for consumers if we were to see something like driverless trucks take over. Now, obviously, there would be a lot of people out of work, and that would suck. And as I said, I don't relish that. But I do think, there are ways to adjust and overcome that. Mises has some great quotes on this in Human Action. He says, in training himself, the worker becomes a speculator and entrepreneur. The future state of the market will determine whether profit or loss results from his investment, right? So when we think about people who have invested in a skill set, they have a stable job, right? That stability only exists as long as the market conditions are favorable for that. And just like any entrepreneur, when the market starts to turn in a different direction, you need to be ready to adjust and say, maybe it turns out I made a poor investment. That sucks. I'm going to have to take a hit, but we can adjust. Elsewhere in Human Action, Mises writes, it is certainly true that the necessity to adjust oneself again and again to changing conditions is onerous, but change is the essence of life. In an unhampered market economy, the absence of security, i.e., the absence of protection for vested interests, is the principle that makes for a steady improvement in material well-being. So I think that there is absolutely a way to manage this transition. such that the people who are losing their jobs can land on their feet, can be retrained and find a different skill set. But I think this attitude that we just need to protect them at all costs is really dangerous because, as you say, it's the exact same argument as people opposing the horseless carriage and stuff like that. And how much are we holding ourselves back as a society if that's the attitude we take?
Yeah, and the you know part of this is people looking at the status quo and saying and measuring based only off of that and saying, well, X number of jobs will be lost, and the idea that that will be a sort of permanent deficit on the economy or on society, without understanding what jobs will be created in the future, possibly better jobs. So the livery stable person who worked with the horses in the 1890s, shoveling horse manure, later became a car mechanic, right? I think a lot of people would say maybe that's a step up, right? So the livery stable manure shoveling job was lost. That's true. There's a lot fewer people shoveling manure in livery stables than there were in 1890, but that doesn't make for a permanent deficit on society. In fact, we've grown a lot beyond that. And one of the best examples I've used, I've mentioned it multiple times before, and you mentioned it in what you wrote as well, is about this is I think it's particularly relevant when we talk about manufacturing, and people get especially emotional about manufacturing as a sector of the economy that's especially important. And so they're worried that the percentage of jobs that are in manufacturing in the United States have declined. If we look at another, what used to be the number one industry everywhere in the world, including the United States, it was agriculture, right? Everyone worked on farms. 90+% of people at the time of the founding of the United States worked on farms. And today it's maybe 3%. If you include all the people that work at, you know, uh, manufacturing farm equipment, it's maybe a few more, but it's in terms of people who actually work on farms, it's like 2 or 3%. And so, do we say, look at all those millions of jobs that were lost? Well, they're not lost, right? Because we actually are making more food and agricultural products than ever before. Americans are better fed than before. If anything, they're overfed. And there aren't millions, tens of millions of out of work farmhands in America, right? Yet
Mhm.
the automation in agriculture eliminated all of those jobs. And so, when people, and this especially comes with an AI, they say, well, yeah, the economy has always changed in the past, but this will be so big, this will be so dramatic, this will be so different. I don't, going from 95% of people working on farms to 3% of working on farms seems pretty dramatic to me, right? And yet,
Yeah.
yet we seem to have coped with that just fine over time. I wonder why is it so hard for people to see those parallels?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it comes back to maybe an unspoken assumption of seeing the economy as a static thing. And I think this is where the Austrians especially really emphasize, no, the economy is dynamic. It's constantly changing, right? Markets are constantly adjusting to consumer demands, to the state of technological knowledge. And it's very easy to get into this status quo rut, right? Of thinking that what we have now is what's ideal, and that moving away from it would somehow be problematic, or even just moving too quickly. But as you point out, like we've moved quickly in the past. Yes, there's an adjustment period that needs to take place, but history has shown that this is an adjustment that we are very capable of making, and that if we're willing to face it, we are going to come out on the other side far better. I don't think anyone would want to go back to a world where 90% of jobs were in agriculture. I think we would all agree that that would be a problem, right? And so I think it just we have to get out of this mindset that you get a job and you're just going to have that job for the rest of your life, and that the labor market is just this slowly changing, steady thing that is supposed to deliver security, right? Obviously, a certain amount of job security is nice, but in the dynamic, entrepreneurial, ever-changing market that we live in, we have to appreciate that times change, and sometimes they change quickly. But we need to be ready to embrace that change because it's by embracing that change that we can then progress so much as a society, and the jobs that are lost will be more than recovered by the new jobs that are created and by the abundance that is created because of this technology.
Well, yeah, and one thing you mentioned also about this is that there's a sort of moral argument here, and this is more from sort of the conservative side than the left-wing side,
Mhm.
the idea that human beings, even if we're possible to automate our essential needs away, that we should have to work, right? Because work is good for us, and idle hands are the devil's playground, and if we have too much leisure time, then we'll just get up to no good. And so policymakers should be perfectly happy, banning, say, like labor-saving technologies, right? Because we'll all just be lazy wastrels if that happens. Um, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because this is a long-standing conservative argument about poverty policy, which is why the argument saying the government shouldn't just give people cash handouts and not expect them to do any work because a vocation is important, work is fulfilling. These are good things that give people self-confidence and a sense of self in general, of being a productive person. And when it comes to social welfare policy, I'm inclined to sort of believe those people who have made those arguments over the years that it's actually there's some good to like having a job, but I don't think it's the government's job to force you to work uh, when technology could otherwise give you more leisure. I think if it's a matter of taking someone else's taxpayer money and giving it to you so you don't have to work, those are two very big questions. How do you think, how does that break down for you?
Yeah, so I'm specifically responding here to Matt Walsh in a tweet that he gave that I took issue with, and he was basically saying, yeah, that like it's good for people to work. Idle hands are the devil's workshop, and so therefore we should oppose labor-saving technology like AI on that basis. That if we reduced the work week through technological advances to like 10 hours a week, right now the average is something like 34 hours a week. If we made it so that people could have the same standard of living, but only have to work 10 hours a week, Matt Walsh was basically saying, well, that would be a big problem because people get up to no good when they don't have anything to do and when people aren't as necessary and their labor isn't as necessary. But I think that's actually a really pernicious argument. The fact is, a lot of jobs are drudgery. They're hard, they're toilsome, and it's a sign of poverty that we have to work as much as we do. And I truly believe that people on the whole would actually do a lot of good if we had more free time. Mises points out, you look at the 19th century, the 20th century, these were times where people went from working very long hours to having a considerable reduction in the hours worked, not thanks to the labor unions, but thanks to capitalism largely. And what have we seen? Mises points out we see a proliferation of art, science, philosophy, right? All of these amazing things. Have people also gotten up to some bad stuff with their free time? Absolutely. But I think if you look on the whole, the 19th and 20th centuries are a great example that when you free up people's time, they use it to write books, they use it to compose music, they use it to maybe start other businesses that, would never have been possible, but now that they have this free time, they can go invest in those additional things. And so I think Walsh is really reading history backwards. He has this idea that somehow, as we've gotten more free time, things have gotten worse. I think it's the opposite. As we've gotten more free time, things have gotten better. And we shouldn't be content to say 34 hours a week is fine. I say, no, let's push it down to 10 hours a week because we're only going to see that much more growth and flourishing of humanity if we can eliminate this soul-deadening work that we're currently burdened with. And this is why I use the phrase romanticizing poverty.
Mhm.
It really is kind of saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if everyone just had to work all the time? Well, no, I don't share that vision. I think, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to work? And I believe in economic progress and growth. And that's, what all of our society has been aiming at for all these decades. And I think to say, oh, well, this far is good enough. We should stop. We shouldn't continue pursuing any more growth because then people won't be as necessary. It won't be as necessary for people to work. I think that's a very pernicious view that, if followed, would just make humanity continue to be slaves to work when I think there's a much brighter future ahead of us if we renounce that view.
Yeah, no, and I think you said it's a lot easier to say, yeah, people should always have work to do when your job is tweeting and making videos.
Yeah.
It's harder to do that if you're working as a bricklayer who's like back is going out after 25 years of hard labor. Um,
Yep.
it, so this is an interesting question where certainly human beings do work. Americans, developed world people work a lot less than they did 100 years ago or 200 years ago on average. Um, the uh the idle aristocrats probably work a little bit more because they're now on like nonprofit boards or something. But um in general, the hours worked have gone down. And the so some people, some sort of futurists of various eras have said, well, that they expect that to keep going down and down and down to say 10 hours a week or whatever it is. And I wonder how much that will be the case though. Because on the one hand, you could say more productive labor allows us to meet our basic needs in fewer hours of work, but I think it might also make us more ambitious for a greater quality of life. And so, if the average person makes more in some absolute sense out of an hour of labor than they used to, they're gaining more by working more. Right. So that's one reason why
Hmm.
so many more women have gone into the workforce because they've actually been able to make enough money outside of the house that it's worth them leaving
Hmm.
and working more. So I think we've got two things kind of working at cross purposes there. Um, we're sort of being nudged in one direction by one force and the other by the other, and it seems it's not clear where that will end up. If if the average person perceived that they could get $1,000 for an extra hour of work today, people would probably work a lot more, right? Um,
Hmm.
so uh, because I think when you go back and look at sort of the track record of some of these predictions, you know, you had, 100 years ago, like John Maynard Keynes in 1930 wrote this, famous essay about how everyone 100 years from then, otherwise basically now, will only work 15 hours a week, right? Because of like expected gains in productivity. But that hasn't quite been the case because we've eaten up that productivity by raising our living standards, right? So I wonder where where you think this is going to tend for productivity gains from AI. Again, a lot of them are very predicted, but not yet
Hmm.
demonstrated. Whether you think we're going to go more in the case of, Tim Ferriss 4 hour work week, and that's going to be a future, or are we going to work just as much because we'll have more to gain from working?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right that there are kind of two countervailing forces here at work. And as your marginal hour becomes increasingly remunerative, you're going to have an incentive to continue working more. So you're absolutely right. There's probably going to be some balancing out at some point. I think maybe it'll be something like 10 or 20 hours a week. It's kind of an open empirical question where that'll settle, and maybe it'll never settle, right? The world's constantly changing. We seem to have kind of settled in the past few decades where we are currently, but I could definitely see that changing. So yeah, it might be something like 10 or 20 hours. But I also think that we'll see a significant shift in the kinds of jobs that people work. I think that as our standard of living continues to improve, people are going to be able to be more picky with the kinds of jobs they choose, and they're going to be able to choose jobs that have a lot of psychic satisfaction aside from the salary. And so I think that'll be a really interesting trend to watch too, is how much people enjoy the jobs that they're doing. And maybe if they do enjoy them, then, they might still be working 30, 40 hours a week, but at a job that is a lot more fulfilling for them personally. And so you maybe can't see that show up in the metrics, but I think that would still be a clear quality of life improvement for many people.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing a little bit of that trade-off with remote work, and which is
Mhm.
a little bit AI powered in some applications. The ability to do asynchronous work and have online productivity tools and stuff. That was sort of jump started by COVID dislocations, but still is one of the biggest workforce trends today is that so many more people, white collar people, generally not people working in retail, are able to work increasingly from home and or just remotely in general,
Mhm.
and that quality of life of, say, not having to sit in traffic is a significant non-monetary advantage for them that generally does not show up in things like GDP figures and conventional economic statistics, but is nevertheless a significant uh, influence on people's decisions of where and how much to work. Um, so, the question of, where all this goes next is, um, for free market people, it's usually there's two categories. For everyone else, it's all kind of mushed together. But for us, it's what are private players in the economy going to do, and then what is the government going to do? Um, and and so I wonder what kind of advice we could, theoretically give. So imagine we're at, the World Economic Forum in Davos, or some big, group of CEOs and global corporate leaders together. What advice would we give them? And then the one probably worry about more, because they have more power to affect our lives. What advice would we give to policymakers, members of Congress, government officials about how they should respond to these trends in AI technology and workforce changes? Um, because I think whenever there's a hot new thing that's in the news, that's a topic, it's under discussion in society, people who are politicians and policymakers in government, they feel the need to do something, the dreaded need to do something, right?
Yep.
To look like they're leading when, of course, they're following public opinion. But what is the thing maybe they could do that would be the least bad?
Yeah, so in terms of the private sector actors, I think that the technological questions around alignment are worth taking seriously, and like definitely, I think that's a debate that needs to continue to be had. Obviously, I'm not an expert on that issue, but I do sympathize a lot with concerns around that. But I don't sympathize as much with the technology replacing jobs concerns. I think to the extent that that's a factor, we should just allow the free market to go ahead and make an AI powered Wendy's drive-through and make an AI powered everything because to the extent that there's market demand for that, that's only going to be improving our lives. In terms of policymakers, I would kind of similarly, obviously, I think that policymakers should just be hands off on everything that doesn't involve enforcing property rights. And especially when it comes to the economic factors. Fortunately, I don't think that Matt Walsh's argument in particular about how it's important for people to work a lot, I don't think that's getting a lot of traction. But I do think, like Tucker Carlson's comment about worrying about the transition and people losing their jobs, I think that one is getting more traction in the political scene. And my advice to policymakers would be, go read Mises and the rest of the free market tradition on this. And I think it's really important for them to understand the importance of a dynamic economy and of letting the market do its thing when it comes to the labor sector and not being blinded by compassion, this misguided compassion to say, oh, we're going to help these workers who are losing their jobs. The problem is when you do that, you hamper the market process. You're effectively intervening on behalf of what are, from the market's perspective, inefficient special interests, right? That are trying to reap an unfair advantage, right? And you're basically forcing consumers to pay more for products, right? Just because these producers, in this case, labor producers, don't want the competition. That's kind of an uncharitable way to frame it, but from the market perspective, that's what's going on here. Is the government is considering protectionist measures that would protect inefficient producers from the competition of, say, AI technology. And so, my advice to policymakers would be to not take that argument seriously. Sure, absolutely take the alignment concerns seriously, but recognize the benefits of a dynamic market economy and allow a level playing field and allow free competition so that we can improve our standard of living by that means.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember is here we've been here before, right? And like we said, going all the way back to the original, Luddites who objected to new textile technologies um, through every every era since then, every decade since then, there's been some new technology that people have been worried about is going to kill off jobs and lead to like long-term job losses. Um, but we've also had plenty of predictions of catastrophe, right? This new technology is going to cause this terrible problem, and so the government needs to step in and protect us and protect the economy or protect a certain sector of workers or protect a certain sector of industry. And for the most part, those have fallen flat. And to the extent that they haven't fallen flat and been taken seriously, they've caused dramatic problems and misalignments in the economy. And you know, to me, it seems it's a very common thing, whether it has to do with technology and competition, or trade and tariffs, or subsidies for some supposedly important new technology, that uh, because the economy is always changing. There's always this sort of Joseph Schumpeter creative destruction going on. In any economy that's not collapsing, right? There's always this sort of churn of change. Uh, that it's not that there won't be any problems along the way. It's that a lot of policymakers are not willing to deal with those problems to get to the better stuff on the other side. And so I think uh, but that refusal to deal with that discomfort uh, is a long-term drawback for individuals in the economy, for the economy in general. It's sort of like saying, well, people say I should go to the gym, but the next day after I go to the gym, I'm really sore. And that can't be good. We don't want to maximize soreness in America. So maybe I should just never go to the gym and then I'd never be sore. It's like, well, sure, but then you'd be much weaker, right? And you wouldn't be reaching your goals, right? And or say you trip and fall and you break your knee and they expect you to go to physical therapy. And that's painful as well. It seems like the strategy is not to say, well, we're just going to try and minimize any discomfort ever, because then there's no achievement on the other end. There's certainly no greater achievement. To me, there's a sort of like, unified theory with all of these like big picture economic interventions, which a lot of them basically have the don't ever go to the gym and feel sore theory behind it.
Exactly. And that goes right back to Bastiat, right? Bastiat has his famous essay, That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen. And he leads it off. He says, in the Department of Economy, an act, a habit, an institution, a law gives birth not only to an effect, but to a series of effects. Of these effects, the first only is immediate. It manifests itself simultaneously with its cause. It is seen. The others unfold in succession. They are not seen. It is well for us if they are foreseen. Between a good and a bad economist, this constitutes the whole difference. The one takes account of the visible effect, the other takes account both of the effects which are seen and also those which it is necessary to foresee. Now, this difference is enormous, for it almost always happens that when the immediate consequence is favorable, the ultimate consequences are fatal, and the converse. Hence, it follows that the bad economist pursues a small present good, which will be followed by a great evil to come, while the true economist pursues a great good to come at the risk of small present peril. And that theme, of course, was picked up by Henry Hazlitt in his book Economics in One Lesson, where he goes through issue after issue, just applying this simple question. Let's not just look at the seen, let's look at the unseen. And I think that when we can adopt that approach, we are going to be moving in the direction of much wiser economic policy.
All right, Patrick, that's excellent. I always expect someone from Fee to be able to quote the Holy Scriptures at at a moment's notice.
For
Um,
sure.
uh, all right, I think this is, put some good perspective on an important issue. I know that is people ask me about all the time. So before we go though, tell everyone where they can find you, find your work, and how they can support the good people at Fee, all that.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at PatrickC1995. And then for all of our stuff, you can go to fee.org. If you want to sign up for the daily and weekly email newsletters that we have, you can go to fee.org/newsletters. If you want to send me a submission for an article, fee.org/submissions, I'd be happy to review it and potentially post it on fee.org. So those are some great places to check out.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.